Hello again, everyone. I'm Dave Thomas, and today I'm building the Star Trek Klingon Bird of Prey by MPC Models. Now, you look at this thing here, it doesn't look like a bird of prey, but that's okay. Something I've noticed about MPC is they basically have 3 or 4 basic model layouts, and then they decorate them in different ways for their various lines. So if you've ever built the Looney Tunes Cadet Cruiser, this is essentially the same model. Okay, it might have a few minor differences just due to kit updates and such. And this fortunately goes together fairly quickly. There's no painting required. It's all pre-decorated for you here. And so this is actually a pretty good one if you're looking for a first or second model rocket to build. Alright, so we'll go ahead and open this up. And as I said, pre-decorated there. Okay. Comes with a little payload section, so that's a little bit different from the Cadet Cruiser. Alright, so let's just go through this quickly and make sure we have everything. Alright, so inside the little small parts package here we have the motor mount tube, we have the fins, launch lugs, engine clip, and shock cord and shroud lines for the parachute. Also these little stick-on doodads here also go to the parachute. And the parachute itself, in my case, was wrapped up in the instructions. And so this is an 18-inch parachute, but you'll have to cut it out yourself and mount your own shroud lines. Okay, we have the main body tube here. Payload bay. Gets a little bit scratched up in there, but otherwise everything looks okay there. Okay, decal sheet. Let's see, I bet that might be hiding in here too. Not in that one. Make sure it's not hiding there. Well, it appears that mine is missing its decal sheet. So I don't see it in any of the usual hiding spots. Okay, so if yours is missing the decal sheets, you can either contact MPC or the store where you bought it. I'm not that worried about it. They just go on the fins here, and with all the other decoration that this thing has, you probably won't even notice it on the launch pad. Just to make sure here, I'll open up my small parts package and make sure that they're not hiding in there. They do give you a or a separately printed shock cord mount there. That's nice. But definitely missing the decals. As I said, to me that's not important. Okay, so we will go ahead and get started here once I clear off the things we don't need right away. Our first step is to assemble the engine mount. And so we'll need the motor mount tube, the clip, and the fin can here. All right, and I've written on one end of it aft, so I don't get that confused later, because the first thing we need to do is make a mark at 50 millimeters or 5 centimeters from the aft end, 2 inches if you're not metrically inclined. I'm just going to put that right there. And if you'll notice here, this is kind of unusual in the rocketry world. Most rocket tubes are spiral wound. This is not. This is just wrapped and seamed here. And so I want to make sure my mark is not close to that seam, or it'll be harder to poke through there. Okay, now I'm just going to take my hobby knife here and just cut a little slit, just enough to let this go through. And this is also a little bit different. This is about half the width of a standard engine clip. It does still work. All right, so we're just going to pop it in there like that. This also acts as the engine block. Okay, now I do get a little bit concerned about that, because if you launch this a lot, this is going to get corroded and you may lose it. So you might, if you have a spare engine block that'll fit this, you could actually stick that down on top if you wanted to. Okay, now we're going to put a little piece of clear tape on this. And mainly this is just to hold it straight until we get it installed. Okay, so I'm just going to put some on there like so. Okay, now this has us gluing this using plastic cement. All right, this is the forward end. This is going to go into the body tube. This is the aft end. I'm just going to do this as a dry fit first to make sure it's going to go in well, because it feels like it's really close. Yeah, that's really, really tight. Okay. And I'm betting that tape is just going to make it worse too. Yeah, see, that's actually peeling my tape off. So we don't have a whole lot of room in there. And I'm going to remove that tape because that's not going to go. There we go. Okay, so we're going to line this up so that the engine clip goes into that slot. Okay, and this should be flush with the aft end like that. Okay, now they show using tube type model cement. Right, and the idea there is that it'll partially melt the plastic and soak into the tube, ideally. Doesn't always work. You can use the plastic cement. I prefer to use a gel type super glue anytime that I'm bonding two dissimilar surfaces here like this. So I'm going to go ahead and push this back out a little bit. I don't want to pull directly on the engine hook. Because it'll probably tear out. There we go. Okay, so now I've got this down about 5 millimeters there. And I've also got extra tube hanging out here. So now what I'm going to do is take my gel super glue. Alright, if you don't have this, you go ahead and use the model cement in the same way. Alright, I'm going to put a bead of this right above the cardboard tube there. And if you got excess, that's fine, just smear it around. Okay, and then I'm also going to put a smaller amount right around here. Now the trick with this one is we don't want to glue ourselves to the motor mount. Alright, and now I'm going to push this against a nice flat object. leave this. Alright, so now I'm going to just push that up. Okay, and then take a tissue or a paper towel and just wipe off the excess there. Here I'm going to kind of wipe it down. Theoretically there's glue down inside there, but it looks like most of it got kind of pushed up, so I'm going to try and take advantage of that there. Alright, now this shows putting this directly into the body tube. I'm going to wait on that until after I do the first part of this. So the next part will be the launch lugs. Okay, so again we're going to orient this so the end without the writing on it down here is the aft end, so I'm just going to write aft inside here. Okay, and the launch lugs here are fairly thick, and they've got a wrap coating on here as well. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this seam here of the body wrap as a guide for me. Okay, so this is showing distance of 95 millimeters from the fin can. Alright, since I don't have my fin can on at the moment, I'm just going to measure it first, not including the insertion point, so that's about 4 centimeters. Alright, which means I need 55 centimeters from the aft end, or 55 millimeters I should say. Okay, so 5.5 would be right there. I'm just going to make a little mark. Okay, and then the upper one should be at 195 millimeters. Okay, so if I subtract 40 from that would be 155, or 15.5. That's going to put it right here. Okay, now what I'm going to do is, using my hobby knife, I'm just going to shave away a little bit of the finish on here. Just right along the seam. And this will give me a better gluing surface. Okay, and I want that to be just a little bit shorter than my launch lug so that when I glue it on, it'll all be covered up. Alright, same thing down here. Oop, cut a little too far there. Don't want that. That'll be fixed when we glue it. Okay, and then on the launch lugs themselves, you can just take a piece of sandpaper, just about any grit will do, and just sand one side a couple of times to roughen it up. If you want, you can try and hit the seam on this as well. Okay. Now, usually I like to use wood glue for cardboard, but I'm going to use white glue in this case because when it dries it won't be as noticeable. Alright, the applicator tip on my glue bottle is broken, so I'm just going to use a little cotton applicator here. Okay, and I'm going to apply just a layer of glue here to the surface that I sanded. And I'm going to bring that down here to the tube and touch that to the tube and pull it back off again. And I'm going to let this get tacky for about 30 to 60 seconds. And while I'm waiting there, I can do the same to the other one. Okay, again applying glue to the sanded area. And then touching that down. Alright, we'll let it get tacky. And come back to the aft one here. Put it back on. And by allowing it to get a little bit tacky, it'll keep it from rolling right off. Okay, now I'm going to look down on these from above, make sure they're centered on that line, first of all. While I'm waiting for the glue to dry on both the body tube and the motor mount, I'm going to go ahead and cut out the parachute here. This is actually a really big parachute for this size of a rocket, and depending on wind conditions, you might want to consider having a smaller one that you can change out. I've flown similar size MPC models on a 12-inch parachute and it works just fine. Okay. Alright, next we're going to need the shroud lines here. And they're kind of grouped together, hopefully not too tangled. So there are actually 3 shroud lines, and these are meant to go to adjacent corners. Okay, so this is showing like this, so corner to corner. Now one of the things you can do is for the middle one, you can go from side to side. And I found that actually they don't tangle as much that way if you do it that way. Okay, now to do this, we're going to take these little self-adhesive circles, they're basically just clear stickers. Okay, and we kind of want to make a circle inside the circle here. So if you stick this to it, and try to keep your fingers off as much as you can so that you don't lose the adhesive. Alright, but it should look something like that. Okay, and then that goes onto the circle on the parachute there. And just squish that in. Okay, and then I'm going to run this under the parachute and attach it to the opposite side over here. The other 2 I will just do corner to corner. And if this looks like a familiar layout, it's what Estes uses on their parachutes. Is 1 across the middle and then 2 along the sides. Alright, and you don't need to get anywhere close to a perfect circle on these. Okay, now we're going to turn the whole thing over and then gather these up. Okay, so on one hand, just loop all these around one finger, And then with your other hand, I'm going to grab the middle of the parachute here, pull everything together, okay, and ideally all these corners should come together at about the same level while all the shroud lines are taut here, okay, and it looks pretty good. Now if you want to do it the way the instructions show, what they do is tie this to the bottom of the payload section here by inserting those 3 loops through there. You pull those through till you got a big loop here, and then you pass the entire parachute through that and pull it taut, and that will permanently tie it down here on the payload section. Now, if you've seen any of my previous videos, you know I don't like to do that. I prefer to use a snap swivel, which allows me to change the parachute out as well as take some of the torsion out of the parachute as it's coming down. Now you can use just about any size of snap swivel as long as it will fit the hole in this and still move freely. Okay, so you can get the brass colored ones or anything like that, but as long as it fits on there, it can still move around, it's fine. Okay, so to do this, we're going to reposition our parachute the same way we did before. Okay, so I'm going to grab all the loops down here and just move those back and forth till all my corners are the same there. Alright, now I'm going to hold on to this down here so it doesn't slip. Alright, I'm going to pass those loops through the swivel side of the snap swivel. Okay, still holding them back here so they don't change length on me. Okay, and now I'm going, so now you can see here I've got the swivel end here is on the shroud lines. I'm going to take the entire swivel, pass it through the loop, alright, and then pull the loops down here and just tighten them up so that they should form a knot on the swivel end there. I'm going to come back and recheck my corners. Those are still good. If they're not, you can loosen this and try again. Okay, but mine is where I want it, and so then you can lock this into place by putting just a little tiny dab of wood glue or white glue on that knot. There we go. Okay, and you just work that into the knot there. You don't need to leave a big blob on it. Okay, and then that can dry, and after about 15 minutes or so, you can go ahead and attach it to this. So I'll go ahead and let that set aside to dry. Okay, and then we're going to come back to the body tube and the fin can. Okay, now before I do this, I'm going to take some sandpaper here, about 100 or 150 grit, and I'm going to roughen up the shoulder here that's going to insert into the body tube. And this is just going to give more surface area for the glue to adhere. Alright. Now again, the instructions call for using plastic model putty for this, or not putty, plastic model cement, which you can use, but again, we're doing dissimilar types of materials. Alright, so I prefer to use the gel super glue. Alright, now I'm just going to dry fit this to make sure we're not going to run into any problems. Pretty snug. Alright, and when this is in place, the launch lug line should go in between 2 fin slots here. And my personal preference is to have my engine hook as close to that as I can so that it's out of the way on the launch pad. Alright, so once you've got that figured out, then take either your gel super glue or your tube type model cement And we're just going to run a bead right along the inside edge here and all the way around. And you can use the tip there to kind of smear it around. Okay, now again, making sure I'm going to be in between two fins. It's still really tight. There we go. Okay, don't do that to me. That just grabbed exactly where I didn't want it to. Well, if you have that happen to you, it just means we'll need to reposition our launch lugs, and there may be enough room there that it won't hurt it anyway. Okay, but learn from my mistake there. I put that in too far over, planning to rotate it, and it just would not rotate. So we had a minor inconvenience there. We can work around it. This part, though, I highly recommend doing it the way I'm going to show you here. So what the instructions indicate for putting the fins on is to apply tube-type plastic model cement into that slot and then push the fins through. Now notice here, those fins are going to be really tight. In fact, you may need to do a little bit of sanding in there. Okay. But what I have seen many times when people build these MPC rockets is they get the cement in there and they go to put the fins in, and they bind only about halfway up, and you end up with fins sticking out like that. Now it will still fly like that, especially if you do them all the same way, but it's not the way it's supposed to look. Okay. So instead, I highly recommend getting some of this brush-on type plastic cement. It's very thin and watery, and you can put it in along the edges here and let it soak in by capillary action. Okay, so I'm going to see if I can get this all the way up. Oh, it's really tight, all right, but that's about where it should go. So the vertex angle here at the root edge should be flush with the aft end of the fin cam. Okay, I'm going to go through and slide the other ones in. Now if you do have it where it's too tight, you can either put a little bit of sanding paper in there, or you could use an emery file like this one and just give it a few strokes here to open that up just a little bit. There we go. Okay. Frankly, you could almost just launch this without glue at all. It is that tight. That one needs a little bit. Alright, and if sanding the slot doesn't give you enough room, you can also sand the edges here. Okay, so now I'm going to check and make sure that everything is nice and flush back in here. Alright, so when I stand it up, it should be standing pretty straight. Okay, it's normal to have these gaps here between the fin and the body tube, and that's just due to the little bit of elevation of the fin cam there. Alright, and now it turns out that I should be able to do this as is. Okay, there's enough room here that the launch rod is just going to slide right against the fin there, and that's fine. Okay, if you made this mistake and there's not enough room for a launch rod there, then you can simply take your hobby knife, cut through the glue there. No, I didn't put any fillets on this yet, and I did that intentionally. It'll be easier to pop these off and just shift them over. A few millimeters is all you really need. Okay, I've got this where I want it positioned, and so now I'm going to take my brush on cement here, and I'm just going to run that right along the edge of the fin mount. Okay, and then I'm just going to do that on each one, and I'll flip this around and get the opposite sides. Alright, and once this dries, it's very not noticeable, as long as you don't get too sloppy with it. There we go. Okay. Well, that actually has gone in there. So if you want, you can also put a little touch of glue along here. But it looks like in most cases that it already drew itself down into that area. So I'm going to leave those alone. Okay. As those are drying, really the last thing we need to do is put in the shock cord. Alright, so just cut this out. Alright, and for this you're going to use either white glue or wood glue. Now this is not very long. This is going to have a tendency to snap back. If you have extra elastic material, you might want to consider just making yourself a longer shock cord. This will still fly, but it just runs an increased danger of having the payload section and nose cone spring back and actually damage the tube. I prefer to have a little bit longer shock cords, but we'll go ahead and go with this. Alright, so here I'm just going to run a bead of glue, maybe. There we go. You want to be fairly generous. You don't want it running, but we want to have a lot of glue in there. And I'm going to set this off at a little bit of an angle, like that. Alright, I'm going to fold up the narrowest part upward. Alright, and let all that glue get in between the two sides there. We want a nice glue sandwich without a bunch of air in it. Alright, then we're going to fold that up. And the reason I put this at an angle is now this part that's embedded in the lower part of the shock cord mount will lay beside the shock cord here instead of on top of it. So it won't bulge up as much inside the body tube. I'm going to pick this up and I'm going to give it a little bit of a curvature like this. Okay, I'm going to check over here quick. Alright, we want this to be at least 4 centimeters down inside the tube so that it doesn't interfere with the payload section there. Alright, so once you've got that kind of bent into shape, go ahead and put some more glue on here. And again, be fairly generous without being drippy. Alright, smooth this all over. As again, we want to avoid air bubbles. Okay, and now this is going to go inside here. And first, I'm just going to shove it down and let it just push itself down there without trying to stick it to the wall yet. And then basically go down as far as you can reach and then push the glue and the mount up against the inside of the body tube and against your other hand here. Alright, try and get it as flat as possible. I don't know if I can show that here. Yeah, you can see it down there. Alright, so nice and flat against the wall. And that's going to need to dry for at least half an hour before you try and launch this. And then the other end is going to go through the eyelet here on the payload section, and then just tie 2 half hitches or a double knot into that. Alright, try and conserve as much of the length of the shock cord as you can so you don't have a whole bunch over on this end coming off. Okay, and then if this is longer than this radius, cut it back a little bit. So about 1/2 centimeter. Don't cut it all the way to the knot or it'll come untied. Alright, once you've got that where you want it, then go ahead and just add a little dab of glue on that knot, kind of like what we did on the shroud lines, and that'll just help keep it locked into place. Okay. Alright, and then we have the nose cone here. This feels like it's polyethylene. So if you wanted to paint this, you're going to need to use a good plastic primer and sand this first. I would just leave it the way it is personally, unless you're just trying to make a different model out of this. If you want, you can try and shave down some of this seam, but a lot of times you'll end up making it worse. So if you're not comfortable with this, just leave it alone. Okay. Now you do want to make sure that this is very snug. Okay, that's reasonably snug, but not very snug, because you don't want this to pop off at ejection and fall down by itself and also lose whatever you had in there. So what you can do with this is just add a little bit of masking tape. You don't necessarily have to do an entire circumference either. Alright, start out with just a little bit like that. Push that in. Alright, and that's good to go. Okay. So now, after all your glue is dried, I'm not going to put this completely together. Alright, but when you're ready, this will go on. So just, you either have your parachute tied on already, or you want the snap swivel method, just snap that on. And then the last thing you can do is take some more white glue and put some fillets in here. So you can either do that if your glue bottle still has a applicator tip that works. As I said, mine broke. So I'm just going to use a small dowel here to put that in. Alright, and then smooth that with a finger. And then do the same thing on this side. Smooth that one in. And try and keep the overflow to a minimum so you don't mess up the tube. And do the same thing up here. Okay, and then let that dry. If you get little bubbles in it and you don't like little bubbles in it, you can apply some more glue, but wait till the first layer dries before you try and put more on. Okay, so I've still got wet glue here, so I'm not going to assemble the whole thing, but that was it. Okay, so we've built this entire rocket in less than an hour. Hope you have a great flight and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.